Hi guys, welcome back or welcome to Switch to Life. And in today's video, we're going to be reviewing the Disney live action remake of Cinderella. And the reason that we're doing this is because, well, one, I just did a review on the animated version and all of its sequels, but two, it's about to celebrate its 10-year anniversary. Now, despite that, I actually have never seen this movie before making this video. And a big reason is because I just never really enjoyed the original Cinderella. So every time Disney would come out with a new live action remake, I was sort of hyped, but I went to go see them and was disappointed. With this one, I was expecting to be disappointed, and it is so amazing. In my opinion, probably the one live action remake that is actually better than the original. I mean, obviously, Disney has made a couple of good live-action remakes, but this one is unarguably better than the original film. A big reason for that is, well, I kept criticizing the original movie for focusing on the mice instead of Cinderella. The mice in this movie don't even talk, which is really good. Cinderella is front and stage. As for the mice, they do share a bit of screen time, but they're just look like normal generic mice, and thanks to the masterful CGI, they're actually able to do a couple of funny actions here and there, but they never steal the show away from Cinderella. This allows the movie to actually be emotional, and we get to see the characters and their emotions unfold on screen, which is really good. Unfortunately, I do have one critique with this movie, and that is the music. In the stance that there is no music. When it comes to Disney music, it's super iconic to the point where you kind of expect it to be in a live-action remake. But there's nothing here. Granted, there's a few original songs, but when it comes to the classics, there's not really anything. I'll admit, I didn't really like the music that was in the original animated version, but I'm so surprised that they didn't even have a scene where Cinderella's mother was singing to a young Cinderella about a dream is a wish your heart makes. That would have been so perfect, but they chose not to include it. Why? Now, I understand why the mice singing about Cinderella was cut out, because in this movie the mice don't talk at all, which makes perfect sense. But then there's the Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo song, which is super catchy and pretty iconic, and for some reason, it's not there. At least the magic words of Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo are still there, but still. And with that, let's talk about the story. Now, I'm not gonna dive into the story because we already know the story, because well, this thing is a tale as old as time. I already reviewed the original animated version with a quick recap, so let's just dive into why I think this movie is better than the original. We're going to go through the movie scene by scene and discuss what I think this movie does good and what I think it does bad. Mostly good things, but anyway, we're introduced to a young Ella who is not yet Cinderella. She's going to get that nickname later, but we're introduced to Ella and when she is just a kid and she has both of her parents. And I really like that because in the animated version, we just meet her as an adult and we get a brief backstory on her childhood. Here, we actually get to see that childhood. We see her parents, especially her mother, how she's always viewed the world as a magical place, and also her mom taught her to be kind and courageous, and that this house is a house of love and she should take care of it. Her mom also admitted that she believes in fairy god magic and essentially says that when you're kind, the universe will reward you in some grand gesture. And while I don't think Ella believes that because she's a bit of a realist as she grows up, she never once abandons her mom's ideology of being kind and courageous, and that's really good. But unfortunately, as time went on, her mom got sick and passed away. A few years later, her dad realized that he was lonely and he decided to get back in the dating game. But I really love how he asked for permission from his daughter before going through with it. And I love how Ella decided to agree almost immediately because in her eyes, everyone deserves a chance at happiness. And so we're introduced to Lady Tremaine and her two daughters. A while later, her dad is called to go on a business trip and he has a conversation with his daughter. And I really love how the stepmother is overhearing the conversation. And at this point, she realizes even though she kinda loves the man, she realizes she's always going to be second to his own daughter, which is kinda sad, but it makes sense. During the conversation, he asks Ella what does she want as a souvenir from his business trip. And she decides to ask for the first branch that brushes your shoulder. And while that is a bit of a weird request, I think that she explains it in the best way possible.
You'll have to take it with you on your way and think of me when you look at it. And when you bring it back, it means that you'll be with it.
Now that is actually really cute. Anyway, her dad goes on the business trip, often writing back about his journeys, but then one day a postman arrives with some terrible news. Her dad got sick and he died on the road. His last request was that the branch that he'd been carrying this whole time would be delivered to his daughter Ella. And I really love that because it just shows how much her dad wanted to come home. And in a way, a small piece of him actually did come home. And what makes it even better is even though Cinderella is stricken with grief, she decides to thank the man and apologize for how hard the journey must have been, really showing how much she cares about others even when she's upset. And she has every reason to be upset because even before the bad news showed up, she was actually kicked out of her own bedroom and sent to the attic in favor of giving the bedroom to her stepsisters, Anastasia and Drizella, while Lady Tremaine got the master bedroom. Anyway, as time passed, she just kept hoping this will be better when Dad gets home and fixes everything. But then he never came home. So without a man to provide income for the household, they unfortunately had to fire all of the staff with the cleaning, the cookers, and it's really upsetting because these were all her friends from when she was growing up as a child, and it's sad to see them go. But she also has to take over in their duties, and now, thanks to Anastasia and Drizella and Lady Tremaine, she's been reduced to a servant in her own house, and she's tasked with many chores, and oftentimes Lady Tremaine says that this is good because it would distract from the grief of losing her father. So that's exactly what Ella told herself. She didn't really have any human friends since she never left the house, but she did have a bunch of mice friends. And again, the mice don't really talk in this movie, but they do have plenty of emotional characteristics, especially Gus Gus. I'll admit, if you liked the mice in the animated version, or even Lucifer, the cat, you probably won't like this version since both of them are just reduced to background characters. In fact, I'm pretty sure Lucifer only appears in one scene, and it's like 10 seconds. Now, I've already said that Cinderella sleeps in the attic, but sometimes the attic gets too cold, so she ends up sleeping next to the dying embers, and this makes it so ash and cinders cover her face while she's sleeping, which gives her the name Cinderella, or Dirty Ella, from her stepsisters. And so Cinderella realizes that that name holds a lot of power, because now she's not just some girl trying to take care of a house, she's actually a slave in her own home, and it's clear that her family has no care for her, especially because they won't even let her eat with them. So she takes a horse and goes out riding to, distract herself from that pain, and then she ends up meeting a cute boy named Kit, who is actually part of a royal hunting party, and they're trying to hunt a stag, which Cinderella says, what has that stag ever done? He has a lot left to live for, and Kit is kind of inspired by her words, and that just makes it so he's attracted to her. What Cinderella doesn't know is that this Kit is actually the prince of the kingdom. So he goes home, and we'd learn that his dad is actually dying from a sickness, and so he decides that he wants to see his son married off and for the kingdom to have a secure future. Because the fact is, they live in a very small kingdom. So they decide to have a royal ball where he makes his son decide to marry a girl. So Kit comes up with the idea that they shouldn't just invite royal lords and ladies, but they should also invite a bunch of commoner girls from their own kingdom, which not everyone is okay with, but Kit says it's a step in the right direction and shows that we care about our subjects. Obviously not his only motivation, since he still believes that Cinderella is a random country girl, but he considers that's the way he wants to run his kingdom because he's kind of inspired by Cinderella's kindness. So everybody gets ready for the ball, including Cinderella, who, after making sure that Lady Tremaine, Anastasia, and Drizella all have their own dresses, works on her mother's dress and updating it for the times, which is really good, and it's actually what happened in the animated version as well. Granted, in that one she didn't work on it at all, but the mice did. Here, she's working on it mostly, but the mice are helping. And right as they're all ready to go to the ball, Lady Tremaine decides to rip up the dress and call it a hideous set of rags. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I like the animated version more, where Lady Tremaine just did some talking, and it was actually Anastasia and Drizella who ripped it up because their mom pointed out some stuff. So now Cinderella goes out into the garden and cries because she doesn't have a dress to wear to the ball. At which point, a statue turns into an old hag, and the old hag asks for Cinderella to give her some bread and a bowl of milk, which Cinderella, out of the kindness of her heart, actually does. So the two of them get talking about how kindness is not a mere nothing, at which point it's revealed that this was all just a test, and the old hag is actually fairy godmother in disguise. Now, like I said earlier, there isn't a bibbidi bobbidi boo song, but there is a lot of fun CGI animation where we see fairy godmother do her magic, like turning a pumpkin into a carriage. Though I will admit it's a little weird that they decided to do it in the middle of the greenhouse instead of taking it outside so it wouldn't destroy the place. She also turns the mice into horses, a couple of lizards into footmen, and a goose into a coachman. And I really love how the animals just admit that they don't have the skills for the job. But then Cinderella is going to get a new dress, and she asks for Fairy Godmother to fix up their old dress because it's like taking a piece of her mother with her by wearing her mother's dress. So that's exactly what happens. She turns the dress from ripped rags into one of the most stunning gowns ever. So Cinderella goes to the ball, at which point we actually get to see Prince Kit and Cinderella dance, at which point Cinderella learns that Kit is actually a prince. So they get to talking after their beautifully choreographed dance, and they end up falling in love, and I'm really glad that we get to see that on-screen chemistry, something that was severely lacking in the original animated movie. At one point, she even loses her glass slipper, and Kit puts it back on her foot. And then, well, midnight comes and she has to run away, once again losing the glass slipper on the doorstep. And I don't know about you guys, but I think there's a slight smirk where she decides to leave the glass slipper deliberately as a souvenir for the prince. So then they go home. Now, while all that is happening, everybody in the castle is trying to figure out the identity of the mystery princess, which I find to be pretty funny. But also, the Duke and the captain of the Royal Guard are having a conversation about how the Duke already promised that the prince would marry a princess from a neighboring kingdom for wealth. Lady Tremaine overhears this conversation, and she says that the secret is safe with her. But when they get home, Lady Tremaine tells her daughters and Cinderella, who happens to be in the room, that exact news. And while the girls are devastated, Cinderella is just happy that she got to spend one night with the prince of her dreams. Sometime afterward, the king is on his deathbed, and he's saying goodbye to his son. And that's when it's revealed that he actually had a conversation with Cinderella as she was rushing out the door, and he was inspired by her beauty and the fact that his son actually loved and cared for her. So just before he dies, he tells his son, "I'm not going to force you to marry for status. I'm going to have you marry for love." So when the king dies, dies, Kit, with just a glass slipper and not even a name, even though he did try to get it, decides to make a royal decree that the mysterious glass slipper princess should present herself. So Cinderella goes to her room to try to find the glass slipper, and I do find it a little weird that out of all the magic that was cast that night, the slippers are the only things that actually managed to stick around after the spells wore off. Unfortunately, Lady Tremaine ends up finding the glass slipper first, at which point she tries to bargain with Cinderella and says Cinderella can marry the prince and live happily ever after, but she's supposed to obey Lady Tremaine and as queen of the kingdom, let Lady Tremaine rule through her. Well, despite all of the kindness that Cinderella has given Lady Tremaine and her stepsisters over the years, she says, no, I will not let you influence the prince like you did my father. And so Lady Tremaine ends up breaking the glass slipper and locking Cinderella up in the attic. At which point she reaches out to the Duke and gives the broken shard of the glass slipper and says, I will keep the mystery girl locked up, but you have to convince the prince to let us have advantageous marriages. And so the Duke presents the broken glass slipper and says that it was just left on the side of the road. And that's when Kit decides we're just going to take my glass slipper around the kingdom and have it on every single girl. And I love that we get to see each girl try on the glass slipper, and even a bunch of girls who definitely wouldn't fit the bill, like 80-year-old woman. But that's just because the Duke wants to prove a point that he's trying every single girl except for the missing mystery girl who probably doesn't even exist anymore. So they go to one last house, a cottage in the countryside, and after Anastasia and Drizella try on the slipper, both don't fit. And while all that commotion is going on, Cinderella is just depressed in her attic. She's trying to sing to herself, and, well, she's kind of given up hope. She doesn't care who the people are downstairs or why they're here. At this point, I'm assuming she's mentally broken, and I honestly don't blame her. For years, she's been pushed around by Lady Tremaine, and she's lost everything. Her home, her family, her friends, her dignity, even her name. But the final straw was that glass slipper, because that just represented all of her hopes. Also, I find it a little weird the song she's singing. I think it would have been so much better if it was one of the classics, preferably A Dream Is Your Wish Your Heart Makes. But anyway, the mice haven't given up hope on her, and they decide to try to open a window, and when they do, that's when all of the royal guard hear her singing, and the Duke just tries to bluff it off as that's just some random bird. But then it's revealed that Prince Kit was actually disguised as one of the guards, because why would you leave someone finding your future wife to anyone but yourself? So he orders his royal guard to go upstairs to the attic, and Lady Tremaine tries to forbid Cinderella from going downstairs, but by royal decree, all maidens were supposed to present themselves, so that forbid is actually forbidden. Finally, Lady Tremaine tries to play the mom card, but Cinderella just says, "You have never been my mother," and she goes downstairs and presents herself to the prince. And when she does, she says her name is Cinderella and not Ella. And the reason is because she's trying to make herself as low as possible in an effort to understand just how much the prince loves her. And, well, he loves her a lot, and eventually the two of them get married. The film finally ends with Cinderella forgiving Lady Tremaine, but unfortunately, due to the king's orders, Lady Tremaine, Drizella, Anastasia, and the Duke were all banished from the kingdom. So it's a happily ever after for all, except those four. Also, another thing I loved is, at the end of the film, we see a wall in the castle dedicated to both sets of the Cinderella and Kit's parents, which is really good. So to recap, I liked almost everything about this movie. There are three things that I do want to talk on. One, the lack of Disney music. That's probably my biggest critique with this live action remake. Number two, the lack of screen time for the mice and Lucifer. Now, I'm really glad that they didn't steal the show like they did in the original, but I do wish that Lucifer got more than just 10 seconds of screen time. Maybe Lucifer trying to stop the mice from reaching Cinderella's window would have been good, but I don't know. And finally, my third critique is that the fairy godmother decided to grow the pumpkin in the greenhouse instead of out in the open. I mean, it was funny, but it just made no sense. Now, I will admit that this movie is extremely good. It had a lot of great writing, not to mention some well-developed characters with a lot of emotional trauma, each one going through their own thing. Though I will admit I wanted some character action from Anastasia and Drizella, but we never got that in the original anyway. So to recap, out of all the Disney live action remakes, this one is my favorite because in my opinion, it is the only one that's actually better than the original. Who knows, maybe there are some people out there who like the live action remakes better than the animated versions. This is the only one that does that job, which is kind of weird because it's actually the animated film I most did not want to see. I literally just watched it when I was going to make this review, and well, I'm astounded by the fact that I've been missing this for 10 years. So with that in mind, what do you guys think? Is this your favorite live action remake? Make sure to leave your thoughts down below in the comment section, and feel free to support my channel by joining my membership program, or you can just do the free option and subscribe. Speaking of, we're so close to 1,000 subscribers, let's see if we can get there. But above all else, I hope that you're staying safe out there, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye bye.
Oh, careful, the foot's a bit swollen. I've been... It's the yeast.